We have seen both candidates in this presidential campaign go beyond the traditional airwaves to reach voters. That includes Vice President Harris's interview with the Call Her Daddy podcast. Take a listen.
He who, when he was president, hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did just as he intended.
Let's bring in our political panel, Molly Ball and Robert Costa. Molly is a senior political correspondent at the Wall Street Journal, and Robert is CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent. Great to see you both. I want to get to Call Her Daddy, but I want to pick up where we left off with Caitlin first, since you both cover the Trump campaign so closely. What did you think about his remarks in Butler and the fact that he brought Elon Musk on stage with him to also talk to the audience?
I think it really symbolizes the way that Trump has expanded his coalition in some unexpected ways in this election. You know, in the past, Elon Musk has been a Democrat. He's someone who quit an advisory role that he had with the Trump administration very early on because of disagreements about climate policy. Now he is all in. He owns one of the most important social media platforms for disseminating political news, and he is very overtly and clearly trying to use that to help Trump get elected. And I think it just shows that for as many people as Trump may have alienated or driven away with the controversial things that he said, he also has a substantial tranche of new supporters in this election who have come to him for various idiosyncratic reasons. But he has built this interesting coalition, notably into some of those parts of the Silicon Valley sort of intelligentsia, as symbolized by an Elon Musk, and in other areas as well that have really sort of changed the coalition structure for this election.
Yes, he has brought in a ton of money from Silicon Valley. But I wonder, Robert, what you make of sort of the darker tone that we heard, the accusations about what Democrats are trying to do to him, which is not necessarily new, but it does feel like a new step in the rhetoric.
Well, it's not exactly a new step in the sense that really for a decade now, since he entered the political arena, former President Donald Trump has had this kind of message about America. You think back to his inauguration speech, American Carnage. Steve Bannon infamously or famously said, depending on whom you ask, that Trump wanted to turn around in his inaugural speech and wave and wag his finger at those seated on the dais, those members of Congress. He has always framed himself as anti-establishment. That's often come across with dark rhetoric that casts the establishment, those in elected power, Republicans and Democrats alike, as nefarious, villainous. It goes back to Trump's theatrical sense of politics and how he doesn't see things in a red-blue binary, but more in this kind of television producer mentality of he's really going to stir up the drama. So to hear this kind of rhetoric is par for the course with Trump. The challenge for Trump is, and you mentioned Silicon Valley, such a great point, he's brought in some favorites to his campaign from Silicon Valley, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, not of Silicon Valley, but was kind of a darling of certain figures in the tech community. Those who are close to Trump have often told me he would likely lose this election if Trump was associated with the past. Trump equals the past, litigation, politically speaking, over the 2020 election. But if Trump could equal change, if he could be seen as the change candidate, the anti-establishment candidate, then he would have a real shot at winning this race. And you always see that tension even now. Is Trump going to be pulled into talking about 2020, or can he talk about the present and really cast himself as different than Vice President Harris and the current administration? And that's really going to be the challenge for the Trump campaign moving forward. Can he close now by being change, or will he get pulled into the vortex of the past?
And the Trump camp has also said that Harris is not an agent of change, that she is just an extension of Biden. And that's one reason they claim why she doesn't do interviews. But now she's on this media blitz. Do you think this is a response to their criticism? And is it going to move the needle at all? We're seeing her, everywhere.
Well, and it's interesting how they're targeting her appearances. You see them very precisely trying to target the type of groups that she needs to reach to win this election, notably going over the heads of much of the mainstream media, with the exception of, a well-regarded, well-watched show like 60 Minutes, of course. But here we are on a streaming platform, right? More and more people are not, unfortunately for me, getting their news from a newspaper on their doorstep every morning. Or from some of the more traditional media. And so she's finding ways to reach, Gen Z women in the case of something like the Call Her Daddy podcast, young men in the case of some of the other podcasts She's sought out, and a broad general audience that may not be focused on the news, but is watching entertainment media like the late night programs. So you see, and I don't think this is her taking the bait from the Trump campaign, because her campaign has been very intentional and disciplined about not taking Trump's bait throughout this campaign. But they do see the imperative for her to get in front of as many voters as she can, to get attention from as many voters as she can, particularly voters who don't care about politics, because those are the final get out the vote targets as Election Day nears.
And Robert, you know, Call Her Daddy is one of the most popular podcasts in the country. So it's not just about the crowd size, right? Who is she trying to connect with when you look at that particular audience?
Well, based on my reporting about this podcast, it's notable that she's going on something that is, at first blush for some people, appealing to women and maybe has a progressive ilk. But the history of this podcast and its host, Alex Cooper, are a little bit more complicated. They're not as straightforward as just being some kind of left-wing podcast that's popular with women nationwide. It was originally a production of Barstool Sports, which is founded by Dave Portnoy, who has more libertarian-leaning politics. She then became an entrepreneur, broke with her original host, and now is kind of an entrepreneur on her own with this very high-valued podcast. And it's never had a political tilt per se. So for Vice President Harris to go on there, it's not like she's checking a box with a progressive constituency. She's reaching out to women. There are also men who listen to this podcast, from what I can tell. And it's non-political. And what she's doing, and I think she recognizes this when I talk to her advisors, that so many young people today, if they went to high school or college under the Trump administration, they do not see Trump oftentimes as abnormal on the American political scene. And she can't maybe correct that point of view, but she needs to counter it by making these such appearances so that young people don't look back at Trump with fondness and say, my parents maybe had more money, or it was a more positive experience for me. Because so many people who are, let's say, above 30 see Trump as definitely something that's an aberration in American political history, but the younger people do not. And so she really, I think, is trying to get that soft, non-political voter to give her a fair hearing.
And then she'll do a more traditional show tonight on 60 Minutes. Thank you for the shout out, Molly. And thank you so much for being here, Molly Ball and Robert Costa.